This is Clarinetland, probably one of the trippiest places in Spongebob. This place is shown in the episode Squidward and Clarinetland. The episode starts with Squidward biking to work, and dude's actually happy for once. Bro even gets dusted by this car and gets rocks in his face, and he's still happy. Something is very off about Squidward, obviously. This is not the Squidward I remember. He even enters a Krusty Krab all happy singing. SpongeBob then walks in and squishes him with the door, and now for sure he's about to flip out, right? Nope, not at all. He's extremely nice and says it's not a problem at all. Even Mr. Krabs scraping his claws on the chalkboard, which bothers every other customer, doesn't faze Squidward. Squidward is just unbothered by everything. And even Mr. Krabs realizes this and says,
"Did you get an order of any decorative soaps in the mail this morning?"
Now this got me thinking Squidward may be on drugs. I may be reaching, but the smile when Mr. Krabs says this got me thinking he ain't talking about regular bar soaps. Cause it wouldn't make sense why Squidward is so happy just because he got some soap to wash his body. Also, when doing some research, I found out soap is toxic to fish. So maybe Mr. Krabs is making a joke that he's intoxicated. But anyways, he finally tells us the real reason he's happy, which is because he has a clarinet recital after work. So he's not on drugs, but I still do think Mr. Krabs was hinting at that. But the world keeps testing Squidward, and a baby spills all their milk on his clarinet case. But this doesn't bother Squidward until he opens his clarinet case and the baby drools on his clarinet, which finally, after all of this, he flips out and lets all of his anger out. And we finally get the Squidward we remember. He complains to Mr. Krabs that he demands a place to put his stuff, and Mr. Krabs isn't really helping him out until Squidward pulls out the book, Bikini Bottom Labor Regulations. And I can't even imagine how many rules he has broken in this book, but Squidward just points out one of the rules. It says that all employees should be provided with a safe place to put their stuff, and Mr. Krabs takes defeat and agrees with Squidward. Then we cut to SpongeBob, who is down bad for some patties.
Yeah, sizzle those juices.
Mr. Krabs stops his beautiful moment with the patties and brings out the most disgusting locker I've ever seen. And also when he opens it up, we see a whole skeleton who is supposedly Corporate Sterling. And I feel like this part is so brushed off. Mr. Krabs' lore is so interesting. Like, is this dude a murderer? Why is SpongeBob so unfazed by this? I'd be tripping out. Also, Mr. Krabs says that it was a prank, which, what? If Mr. Krabs can murder someone for a prank, what else has this dude done? I want to believe it's a fake skeleton, because he said it was a prank, but he did say a skeleton was a person, so I don't know if it really was fake. Mr. Krabs calls in Squidward though, and yes, he did get what he wanted, but there's one flaw. He has to share this locker with SpongeBob, which he isn't a fan of obviously, but he can't do much about it. Then SpongeBob cleans a locker, and we see dust go everywhere. And I want you to remember this dust, because it's actually going to be important later. So the locker is now perfectly clean thanks to SpongeBob, and Squidward puts his clarinet in the locker, and SpongeBob puts his toothbrush in the locker, and bro, this is disgusting. Squidward goes back to his shift, but he notices SpongeBob is messing with the locker, and this makes Squidward mad. But all SpongeBob did was add velvet wrap to the locker, but his clarinet is safe, so it's okay. But SpongeBob's not done with messing with his locker. The next scene we see is him walking in with boxes full of tools, and this catches Squidward off guard. So he goes and checks the locker once again, and this part is just crazy. This little small locker is now huge. It's now an entire file cabinet locker, which makes no sense at all. But Squidward's clarinet is still safe. But now it's more confusing to get to it. You have to check the card catalog, then find the card, then open said drawer, and his clarinet is there. And I gotta feel so bad for Squidward. Dude just wants his clarinet to be safe to do a recital, which is like the one thing that makes him happy. And he's just been stressed the entire day. But it's okay, the clarinet is safe. But then Squidward hears SpongeBob working on the locker once again, and he's so stressed he can't even take this fish's order, and so he runs to check on the locker. And if you thought the locker was huge before, now it's even bigger, and SpongeBob's nowhere to be seen. And also, the drawer that held his clarinet doesn't have his clarinet anymore, but has a card redirecting him to another shelf. But then he checks that drawer, and there's another note, and on the card SpongeBob laughs and says,
"Oops, I meant another drawer."
So it kind of seems like SpongeBob is purposely messing with him right now. Then as Squidward is walking around looking for SpongeBob, SpongeBob just runs right past him, and it's kind of scary just hearing distant laughing from inside this maze of lockers. But as he's walking, he sees a hole and decides to crawl through it. And first off, before we see what's behind the hole, is this just not crazy that Squidward is right now inside a little locker? Like, what? So anyways, behind the hole is a stage with a curtain. And when opening the curtains, we see a bunch of huge clarinets. I welcome you to Clarinetland. So he walks around and is very confused and scared. And I can't blame him. This place is so eerie. Then we see his clarinet, but it's alive and bouncing around. Then we see SpongeBob again just being so creepy, laughing and running off from him. So he runs after him to get his clarinet. And if all this wasn't weird enough, Squidward runs into a talking eagle head. This episode is getting so weird. So the eagle head is the keeper of the hornet forest, and Squidward tells him he's trying to find his clarinet, and the eagle tells Squidward that a clarinet is not owned, and literally swallows Squidward whole, and he just gets spat out in what seems to be the eagle's body. And we see SpongeBob again, all menacing, just laughing with his clarinet. I never knew that innocent little SpongeBob could be so creepy, but this dude is freaking me out. Squidward goes to catch SpongeBob, and they both end up falling down some part of the eagle, and Squidward falls into a square, and SpongeBob just disappears. Squidward is starting to freak out, and then in the mirror next to him, there's another Squidward who laughs at him, and then sticks a clarinet into his mouth, which is so unsettling. And then both mirror clarinet Squidward heads just start playing in his ears, and dude runs off, and he's still trying to chase SpongeBob, but then he ends up in a SpongeBob pinball machine that Patrick is playing. This episode is tripping me out. What is happening? So Patrick grabs his prize out of the pinball machine, and he grabs little Squidward, and Squidward asks how Patrick got so big, and he says it must be all the pressure, which makes no sense. But then the place starts to shake, and Squidward gets vacuumed up and explodes, and now Squidward is in space chasing SpongeBob. And after he finally gets him, we see Squidward in the locker, and the locker is not big at all, it's still the same size, and Squidward looks rough. And this part got me so confused. Was everything we just saw not real? And this whole time, Squidward was just asleep in his locker. So then the real SpongeBob, I think, comes to Squidward and asks if he's okay. And he can't even talk right, he's just muttering gibberish. But he says he had a nightmare, so I guess all that just happened was a dream. And he starts talking about his clarinet, and so SpongeBob brings out the clarinet, and supposedly he held onto it to keep it safe, which is actually really nice. But since Squidward thinks he just went through what we just saw, he gets extremely mad and throws SpongeBob in the locker, chains him up, and puts him on a bus to far, far away. Finally though, after all of that, Squidward finally arrives at the recital, and nothing can go wrong now, right? So Squidward opens up his clarinet case, and SpongeBob pops out of it, which how did this dude get here? Bro went from a locker, chained up in a bus, to somehow sticking into Squidward's clarinet case. I don't know, that makes no sense. Anyway, Squidward gets freaked out, obviously, and runs out of the recital. So yeah, this episode is so weird, but in the best way possible. Now I have some theories as to what Squidward was going through. At first I thought he was on drugs because of Mr. Krabs' comment, but it's obvious he wasn't, because he clearly states he was happy because of the recital, which makes sense. Squidward's dream of being a professional clarinet player seems to be the main thing pushing him through his miserable life. And also, we watch him freak out after the baby drools on his clarinet, so he's obviously not on drugs. But we do watch as Squidward inhales the dust from the locker, and pretty much directly after this, we watch as he goes into Clarinetland. Now I know dust isn't gonna make you trip, but this is no ordinary dust. This is dust from a Navy SEAL locker, which we have no idea what kind of fungus and toxic things are on it. Now of course these are theories, and honestly they don't make much sense, I'm not gonna lie. But one thing that's really confusing is how did Squidward end up in the locker? We never watched him enter the locker, and Squidward himself doesn't even remember going into the locker. So how did he crawl into the locker and then pass out? Well, we do know that the last real thing we saw was SpongeBob making the walls of the locker velvet, because in the end, the locker walls are still velvet. We also know in the end, SpongeBob had the clarinet, so maybe he entered the locker freaking out it wasn't in there, but falling asleep in there is just weird. Maybe that dust really did mess him up. Maybe in that one scene where we saw Squidward enter the locker and it was a huge file cabinet room, this is what his brain was seeing, but in reality, he was just crawling in there and then fell asleep. I honestly wish I could understand how he got into his locker and explain what happened, but I'm pretty stumped. And I'm okay with not understanding it though, because I think that's what makes this episode so great. I've never been so confused watching a SpongeBob episode, and I think that's exactly what this episode was going for. It's such a creative episode, and Clarinetland feels so eerie and creepy, and it's just nothing you could predict. This episode probably takes the cake in all the episodes I ever watched of being the most unpredictable. I mean, we start off simply with Squidward just wanting to keep his clarinet safe. Then we watch as this man literally enters a little locker and goes into another world, and things just keep getting more and more random, and I just love it, I can't lie. And what's cool about this episode too is I'm pretty much 100% sure this episode was inspired by Alice in Wonderland. I mean, it's called Squidward in Clarinetland, which I actually just realized too. But yeah, this episode was insanely trippy, and I think that's why it's so iconic to me. It's something so unusual that just sticks into your brain. And yeah, it's me talking about SpongeBob, Clarinetland. That's the episode I'm talking about Clarinetland. The episode Clarinetland, Squidward in Clarinetland, Squidward in Clarinetland.